This module demonstrates the capabilities featured in CTD's Risk and Vulnerabilities section. We'll start by learning about the different cybersecurity threat definitions you need to be familiar with. Then we'll break those vulnerabilities down into subcategories and describe each one in more detail. Next, we'll learn about the Claroty software tools that are considered essential to a cybersecurity solution's vulnerability management capabilities. Finally, I'll use our demo system to show you the CTD user interface and give a quick demonstration of how the features work. In context of cybersecurity, vulnerabilities are weaknesses or potential weaknesses that exist within the hardware devices making up your network. Depending on the device, its configuration, the amount of attention given to the device, and so on, these weaknesses may take many different forms. Something all vulnerabilities have in common is that they can be exploited by threat actors, that is, by human beings who have some interest in leveraging your system for their own ends. Exploitation usually takes the form of penetrating the network and disrupting the normal operation of different systems and devices within the facility. This creates an ongoing need to manage vulnerabilities. Vulnerability management brings together a number of continuous processes. As we learned in the previous module, it starts with clear visibility of all your network devices, as well as visibility into the operational life cycle of the plant. To accomplish all that, you need to actively monitor and analyze the network traffic. When vulnerabilities have been identified, the next task is to identify the most critical devices to patch, then organize the patching process in terms of priority. This is especially true for process control networks, because maintenance of them typically only happens once or twice a year, and within a very narrow time window. This is because patching and machine maintenance lead directly to downtime. In industrial networks, downtime translates into large financial losses every minute. After identification and prioritization, the relevant users must be made aware of the vulnerabilities. This introduces a need for accurate and efficient reporting. If users become aware of exposures within their network, they need to immediately remedy the exposures according to the risk prioritizations we mentioned earlier. Then verify that the remediation has taken place and was successful. Vulnerabilities can be classed into two subcategories. The first one is common vulnerabilities and exposures, better known as CVEs. CVEs are publicly known exposures and are available to view through many different online sources. Each CVE includes a unique identifier and contains a full description of what the vulnerability actually is, how to remedy it, and so on. Each CVE has a risk value assigned to it. Typically, this is recorded within the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS. The second subcategory is unknown vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities are almost always not common knowledge. If they are exploited, they are usually being exploited for the first time. The result is what is termed a zero-day attack. Now I'm going to describe the ideal characteristics of the tools you must have in order to manage network vulnerabilities efficiently. First, you must have in-depth visibility into every hardware device in your network, down to and including the serial number, model number, and firmware version of each device. As I stressed in the visibility module, without this information, it is impossible to accurately identify vulnerabilities in the network assets. This is because vulnerabilities exist not only as parts of specific devices, but as part of different firmware versions applicable to specific devices. Next, the risk management tool you use must provide detailed explanations of why the device being examined actually poses a risk, as well as what level of risk is inherent in that device. What this means in practice is not just identifying vulnerabilities in the device, but also considering where in the network this device is placed and connected, considering how accessible this device is from the point of view of a threat actor intending to penetrate or attack it, and considering how critical this device is in context of your organization's day-to-day business life. Another important consideration when evaluating the amount of risk is whether this device was previously the subject of an attempted or successful penetration. The tool you use must also feature an easy-to-use reporting function. Ideally, this should allow you to provide the needed data to the relevant personnel with minimal intervention by the relevant users and with a single click. Finally, the tool mustn't just inform you of risk, It should also assist you in remediating risk and vulnerability issues as quickly as possible by providing a detailed assessment of each identified vulnerability. This allows users to quickly understand how serious the vulnerability is, then proceed to remediate the issue. Now we're going to enter the CTD demo system and see what the theory we've just learned actually looks like in practice. We are now in the CTD user interface. This is the default dashboard view, and now we will focus on the risk and vulnerabilities section. The first thing we see is a hygiene score reading. This value refers to the accumulated risk level that is currently posed to the system. It is calculated as a function of the critical security insights found by CTD, the common vulnerabilities and exposures, the anomalies detected, and how many critical assets have been identified. A low score on the meter indicates that the system is highly vulnerable to attacks, and the other way around. This meter can also be seen as a bar graph in the dashboard widgets in the Risk and Vulnerabilities section. The overview shows which aspects of the network can be fortified, with the aim of achieving a more robust network architecture and enhancing protection of the system. The overview indicates whether the system is sufficiently patched by showing gaps in network security using different widgets. This view is completely customizable. Users can add and remove whichever widgets they choose and also create additional ones. Different dashboard views can also be created and utilized as needed. The Insights view shows insights into the system that have been generated by CTD. An insight is simply a revelation of a particular exposure or vulnerability. It can give the user the means to investigate the operational processes of the device and its impact on system security. Information provided by the Insights tool is based on analysis of your entire security posture, thereby producing a holistic risk assessment across the entire industrial control system, or ICS, network. Expanding the insight shows the list of associated vulnerabilities. In this case, every vulnerability is associated with a full match CVE. Note that every CVE has its own unique identification number. Expanding the listing allows you to see the full description of the CVE. If the computer you're working from happens to have internet connectivity, CTD also supplies a link to reference materials that explain the relevant CVE in more detail. As you can see, a number of insights have been generated for the system. Some of the insights are linked to full match CVEs. Now, I must stress that this is just information regarding potential vulnerabilities that a user should be aware of as part of their overall security posture. Now, let's say you've taken action to remediate a vulnerability, or you don't want to see it as part of an upcoming report. In either case, you can click the Mark All as Completed button for that particular vulnerability. The Insights section has report generation capabilities as well. If we click the three vertical dots in the upper left corner, we see options that will allow us to download a relevant report or schedule a report to be sent out at a later time. Now, let's go back to reviewing the risk evaluation mechanism of CTD. Clicking the asset listing transfers me back to the Assets view. Now, let's open the Risks and Vulnerabilities tab for this device. The first thing we see is CTD's risk calculation for the asset. This is presented as a spider graph. Note that the calculation is available per asset or per virtual zone within your environment. CTD uses a granular risk mechanism to classify assets and virtual zones. The classification is done using a self-learning algorithm that enables users to detect risky areas and risky assets in the network. Presented with the relevant data, users can more easily understand the nature of the associated risk and take the necessary step to remedy it. The entire view is intuitive and informative. To start with the basics, the spider graph tells us why this asset actually presents a risk. Earlier, we were informed that this asset has vulnerabilities, so it's a fair bet that vulnerability contributed to this risk score. If we want more information, the right-hand side of the screen contains a detailed breakdown of all the factors summarized in the spider graph. From a vulnerability perspective, it has those unpatched vulnerabilities. It also uses unsecured protocols and is specifically communicating with risky category asset. This asset has never been the subject of a threat alert, but has a medium risk level for criticality, which has obviously contributed to its risk score. It's important to remember that criticality values are assigned by the user, not by CTD. Therefore, if a user were to deduce that this specific asset is more critical or less critical to their specific organization, they can change the criticality value. Naturally, this would also affect the entire risk score. The asset has been found to be accessible, but no relevant alerts were found. One management protocol and one risky access type are associated with the asset. So, all the relevant information is broken down in a way that makes it easily understandable by personnel who are tasked to work with the system. Not much technical expertise is actually needed to assign priorities to vulnerable assets, or to understand why a specific asset should be patched before any other. Now, this risk assessment is for a single asset. As I mentioned earlier, CTD is also capable of providing the same assessments for entire virtual zones. Let's demonstrate that by going to Zones. First, let's select a zone. Next, let's open the Risks and Vulnerabilities tab. As you can see, we again have a risk calculation, this time for the chosen virtual zone. If you decide that one or more particular zones are more critical in terms of day-to-day process control functions, you can easily prioritize those zones and patch the assets within them. So now you can use the time within a maintenance window much more constructively. Now, just for comparison, let's return to the asset we inspected earlier. This is exactly the same view, but relevant only to a single asset, instead of to a virtual zone containing more than one asset. Insights are also available for individual assets. Remember what I mentioned earlier about taking constructive action based on factual information? Seeing that this particular asset has a long list of CVEs associated with it, the option of remedying those CVEs is now available to the user. We can also see that this device communicates on multiple network interfaces. A number of USB devices have also been connected to this asset. We can see here that all of them have been flash disks and external hard drives. Activity like this also adds to the unknown risk factor. In context, it may be alright to have those USB connections, but just in case it isn't, you should always be aware of this kind of activity. The next section deals with attack vectors. Attack vectoring is a tool that establishes a consolidated view of the cumulative security risks in your ICS network. From there, it helps you proactively find ways to mitigate those risks. It does this by visualizing the impact of security gaps and other potential risks to vulnerable assets. The default view, which is the one we're currently seeing, will always present the riskiest attack scenario first. That is, the attack scenario involving what CTD has determined to be the riskiest virtual zone. Scenarios are calculated from all potential possibilities identified by CTD. We can choose other target zones using the target zone drop-down at the top of the screen. This will show you possibilities for other attack vectors that can be calculated. CTD considers lateral movement when calculating attack vectors. As an example, internal assets may be communicating with external assets through the same subnet. In this scenario, an asset has a connection to an external network. So the network algorithm assumes that all other assets in the network are also connected to the external network. Remote connections, that is, if remote connections have occurred between assets, are also considered. So are OT protocols running OT commands that change device configuration settings. Something else taken into consideration is the domain controllers themselves. The reason being that if an attacker gains control over a domain controller, they can execute commands. So, given this, it's easy to see how CTD's risk and vulnerability management capabilities make it easy to identify the highest potential risks and most critical vulnerabilities within the asset inventory, and take decisive action within those maintenance windows that can otherwise seem so narrow. CTD also includes mass reporting capabilities. What this page is showing is CTD's list of predefined report templates. There are 19 report templates in total, including subjects like inactive assets from last week and completed insights. All the templates are fully functional out of the box, but all of the report templates can be edited to suit individual needs, and all reports can easily be shared with whoever needs them. However, staying with the theme of risk and vulnerability, CTD is also capable of providing a detailed, comprehensive risk assessment report. It can be downloaded or enhanced with supplementary details we may want to add to it, but in this case, let's just click View. The report always starts with the network hygiene score detected by CTD for your site. It would take up quite a lot of time to explain this entire report in detail, but there's really no need to do that as it's quite intuitive and simple to read, even if you're not a networking or cybersecurity specialist. Any customer can use this report to take definitive security-related actions and to review what progress has been made within specified periods of time. With that, we conclude the section on risks and vulnerabilities, and thank you for your time.